Hey everyone, so today we're going to be looking at a Diluc, Mona, and Kaeya deck. It might seem like I am a huge Diluc fanboy, but I'm not. There's nothing wrong with being one, but I just like playing, the Diluc card because he deals a lot of damage. And when you put these three characters together, it is super interesting and they have really good synergy as well. Mona is no stranger to today's metagame because she is a really good Hydro applicant to your opponent's team. She can consistently deal Hydro damage to your opponent and therefore enable pretty good elemental reactions such as Electrocharged, such as Freeze, and also Vaporize. Kaeya is a character that has been introduced to us as a starter hero. He's been there ever since you first start playing Genius Invocation TCG, but I don't think that he's super prevalent in the meta yet. But I do think that he is a very interesting character because he is a tank in itself. With his specialization, you'll be able to deal damage through the use of your elemental skill, and you'll also be able to heal 2 damage to Kaeya, and if you add other equipment to him such as Lucky Dog's circlet, etc., you'll be able to heal even more damage with Kaeya. And more importantly, he is a very good cryo applicant as well, because with the use of his burst, you'll be able to deal cryo application every single time you swap your characters. And then as for Diluc, if you watch my previous video, he is no stranger to this channel. I do really like him because he is able to do huge melt damage and huge vaporize damage. And his burst is just insane in general because he is able to do 8 damage through the use of his burst. And with the use of other equipment cards such as Wolf's Greystone, you'll be able to set up for a huge turn with Diluc, and you'll be able to knock out any character at full health easily with Diluc. So yeah, all in all, this is a really fun deck. I'm just trying to look for decks that are slightly off meta, slightly interesting, slightly surprising. So with that, let's think about, this deck from a metagame perspective. Most people are playing Magu Genki at the moment, most people are playing the double Geo decks, but I like a little spice in my life. For those who know me in real life and play TCG with me in real life, I love playing janky decks. I like playing off-meta decks because I do think that having janky decks and off-meta decks make your plays a little bit more unpredictable, and you might have more fun with the different combos when you pull them off. So what this means is that from a metagame perspective, this may not be the best deck in format, meaning I will not be able to consistently deal huge damage every single turn. I will not be able to do things like first turn kills. But what this deck will be able to do is to control your opponents really well, prevent them from doing what they want to set up. For example, if they're trying to set up a huge collate turn to activate things like quicken through the use of Fisher and Collate, essentially you'll be able to use Mona and Kaeya to freeze her and stop them in their tracks, right? And then if your opponent is trying to do too many things, trying to set up everything in one go by doing things such as playing Paimon and then playing weapons, and they're not really doing anything on their first turn, you can actually punish them with this deck because you'll be able to use Mona to apply Hydro, switch over to Diluc for some very tasty vaporized damage, and then at the end of the turn, the Mona's skill will be applying Hydro once more, and you'll be able to deal vaporized damage with Diluc again in the next turn for the knockout. So I do think that this deck has a lot of potential. And yeah, do give it a try, and let's go into the deck tech. So this is the deck that we are going to be going through today. I am going to look at each of these different characters, look at their roles in this particular deck, talk about the team's synergy, and then we're going to talk about the different cards that we choose to play in this particular deck. So first up, we have Mona. I really like Mona as my turn 1 character because of her passive skill. Her passive skill essentially says, hey, when you have Mona as your active character, if you want to swap it to another character, this is basically a fast action. So she essentially has built-in Leave It To Me, and therefore I like to send her out as a first character because she is able to scout what your opponent is trying to do very safely. And if you think that you don't want Mona to be taking that damage from your opponent, essentially you will be able to swap over to another character very quickly. So if those of you who are familiar with the Pokemon metagame, essentially sending out your first Pokemon that has U-turn so that you can deal damage, and quickly swap into another character. It's essentially the same thing. That's Mona's role in here. So this is very powerful because essentially it means that I'll be able to deal hydro damage, right? Through the use of her attacks. And then I'll be able to swap over to people like Kaeya or Diluc as a quick swap, and therefore deal either freeze damage or vaporize damage. And that is, like, elemental damage is always good, the buff is always good. The other reason why this passive skill is really good as well, because it enables Kaeya and Diluc to set up the burst at the end of round 1. For example, even if you don't have Liu Su available, what this means is that you play Mona first, you swap over to Kaeya, and then Kaeya attacks twice, and then he has his burst ready for the start of round 2. If you have Liu Su available, essentially you start with Mona, you play Liu Su, you swap over Diluc, Diluc gets 1 energy, and then Diluc attacks twice, and then Diluc will be able to get his elemental burst set up, which is actually very threatening because which character deals 8 damage at the start of round 2 is actually super powerful and super threatening. And it's not just 8 damage, right? It's 8 pyro damage, which means that if you swap over back to Mona or Kaeya and use some sort of vaporize or melt damage, that character is probably dead. So Mona is really good turn 1 character just because of her passive skill. I also really like Mona because she is basically the glue of the team because of the range of elemental reactions that she enables. Through the use of a normal attack and elemental skill, she will be dealing hydro damage, and using hydro damage means that in this particular team with Kaeya and Diluc on board, it means that you'll be able to easily freeze your opponents, or you'll be able to easily vaporize your opponents. So this enables you to either use Mona to start to control your opponent's characters by freezing them and threatening to freeze, or you'll be able to set up for a kill using Diluc's vaporize damage. I really like Mona's Mirror Reflection of Doom in particular because essentially it deals 1 hydro damage, and it is also a shield plus a consistent hydro applicant as well. So by casting the elemental skill, it deals 1 damage and summons 1 reflection. The reflection decreases your next damage taken by 1, and at the end of the turn, you'll be able to deal 1 damage to your opponent's active character as well. So in today's metagame, most people don't start and end round 1 with the same character. They will always start with their setup character first. For example, if they're playing a quicken deck, they will probably send out Official first and go into Kaeya after. So this is knowledge that is really good to know, because essentially what you can do is that you deal 1 hydro damage to the Official first, and then you summon the reflection, and at the end of turn, that hydro application will probably go on to Kaeya as well, and this means that you'll be able to easily freeze that Kaeya to stop her from doing anything else, or you could even swap over to Diluc and start threatening Kaeya with a lot of damage. So I do like this elemental skill because it almost guarantees your dealing 2 hydro damage to at least 2 of your opponent's characters in their team. So that is Mona. I like her as a 10-1 character, and she is definitely the glue of the team by enabling things such as freeze and vaporize. Next up, we have Kaeya. I do think that Kaeya is a pretty interesting character because he is more of like the control tank in this particular deck. As I mentioned earlier in the intro, basically he is a tank because of his specialization. It is called Cold-Blooded Strike, and it costs a total of 4 cryo dice. Essentially, it means, hey, if you give me 1 extra dice to summon your E skill, which is your Frost Gnaw, I will also allow you to heal yourself for 2. So this means that Kaeya will be able to deal 3 cryo damage while also heal himself for 2, giving you a total of 5 damage value, which is always really good because it means that Kaeya can survive for longer and therefore set up even more cryo damage to either freeze your opponents or set up melt damage for Diluc. So I like Kaeya as a tanky character. I like to have him early in the game so that he can start to freeze my opponent's characters so that they cannot set up properly, and I also like to preserve him towards the end of the game because he is able to give your opponents, that sort of aggressive late game pressure by consistently dealing cryo damage while also healing himself. Kaeya is also really good because of its elemental burst, Glacial Wards. Basically, what it does is that it deals 1 cryo damage and also creates 1 icicle. And the icicle is a 3 usage thing, aura, that deals 2 cryo damage every time you switch characters. So this is actually really good for Diluc, because essentially you can swap over to Diluc, deal 2 cryo damage to your opponent's character, and then with Diluc's pyro damage, you'll be able to deal 3 damage with his elemental skill, plus 2 more melt damage, right? So that in total threatens 7 damage on your opponent with the Kaeya and Diluc wombo combo, which means that the kill zone for both Kaeya and Diluc is 7 damage, and that would be pretty threatening for your opponents, especially on round 2 or round 3. So Kaeya as a character in general is super interesting. I do think that he is someone that is a little bit underutilized, maybe because his elemental burst deals less upfront damage than most of the other characters. But yeah, I do think that he is a character that we should not be sleeping on. Next up, we have Mondstadt's Batman himself, Diluc. Diluc is probably no stranger to you if you watched my previous video whereby I reviewed a Magu Kenki, Diluc, and Jean team. That was really fun, but this deck is probably even more fun. And Diluc is very powerful because of the kind of pressure that he is able to present to your opponents. With the use of Searing Onslaught, basically he deals 3 pyro damage on its own, right? Not considering the additional effect, it deals 3 pyro damage, and with the consistent pressure or ability of Mona to deal hydro damage, with Kaeya's ability to deal cryo damage, this 3 pyro damage can easily be extended to 5 pyro damage once you consider the additional melt buff or vaporize buff. In addition, if you are able to somehow use this elemental skill 3 times in a row, essentially you'll be able to deal a total of 5 pyro damage through the use of this elemental skill and on its own. And that is the reason why we play Diluc's specialization in this particular deck, Flowing Flame. So Flowing Flame is really good because essentially it says that when Diluc equips this card, he will use his Searing Onslaught, and then the next time you use Searing Onslaught, you will only be spending 2 Pyro die in order to activate that Searing Onslaught. And this means that the moment you play this, if you roll all Pyro dice and all 8 Pyro dice, you'll be able to attack 3 times with Diluc, and you'll be able to activate his secondary ability in Searing Onslaught, and therefore you'll be able to deal at least 11 damage through the use of Diluc without even considering the additional elemental reaction buff that you'll be able to get from Mona and Kaeya. So this puts Diluc at a prime position to be a late game finisher, because what you might want to do is to set up the game early through the use of Mona and Kaeya to deal as much hydro or cryo application to your opponents as possible, and then moving on to Diluc to deal additional pyro damage. And yeah, I think this is really cool in general. And then the next thing that you have here is Dawn, which is his elemental burst. It is pretty pricey, it is quite difficult to set up. It does take 3 energy and 4 pyro dice to set up, but it does deal big damage. It deals a total of 8 pyro damage. If your opponent has any sort of elemental reaction already applied on them, any sort of hydro or cryo applied on them, they basically die because this elemental burst would do 10 damage. On top of that, this character will also gain power infusion for, I believe, the next 2 rounds. Yes, it is 2 rounds. So what this means is that Diluc's normal attack will be converted from physical damage to pyro damage, and this is pretty powerful as well, because the next turn, if you're stuck with Diluc and if you have Kaeya's burst still online, essentially you can deal 2 physical damage through the use of Tempered Sword, which will be converted to pyro damage. You deal 2 pyro damage, and then if you swap over to either Mona or Kaeya, essentially you'll be able to deal 2 cryo damage plus 2 melt damage for a total of 6 damage just through the use of 4 different dice. So I do think that this is a really powerful card or really powerful burst effect in itself, and it's not something that we should not sleep on. There's just a lot of aggressive pressure from Diluc's ability in itself. So yeah, that is basically the 3 characters that we have for today. And next up, we're going to talk about this team's synergy in general. So to summarize, this deck is not a deck that specializes in anything. It does not specialize in control. It does not specialize in dealing damage. It should probably be quite clear because we're using 3 different characters of 3 different elements. But this deck is a really flexible deck. It requires you to swap in and out quite a bit. But that should not be a problem because Mona is able to quick swap into other characters, and even when you swap into different characters, Kaeya's burst allows you to deal damage even while you're swapping, and therefore, while you swap, you'll be leaving your active character to get taking damage. But while your opponent, or rather while your active character is taking damage, you're also dealing damage right after you swap because Kaeya's burst is online. So this is a very flexible deck that relies on quick swapping. I also play a lot of healing in this particular deck as well because you do need time to set up Diluc's burst, you do need time to set up Mona's burst, and therefore I would like to get some sort of healing for my active character and my standby characters just to drag out the game a little bit longer. So for this particular deck, I would say you probably can't end games on round 3, round 4. It's probably like a round 5, round 6 thing. It does take a bit of patience in order to set up properly, and it does take a bit of patience in order to kill your opponents properly. But when it pays off, it pays off, and it's fun and it's great. And yeah, do try it out. And next up, we'll be talking about the ideal turn 1 play, and I'm going to be walking us through an example through the use of recorded gameplay against Ayaka Freeze. Alright, so we'll be looking at recorded gameplay against Ayaka Freeze. We'll be looking at this particular gameplay in further detail, in greater detail later on during the gameplay section. But I just wanted to show 2 things in this particular replay. I wanted to show what my opening hand should be, what I'm trying to mulligan for, and how I play out my turn 1 play based on my opponent's team and what I think their strategy is. So during turn 1, I'm always very happy to be looking at a Liu Su, because with the use of Liu Su, I'll be able to set up my character's burst really easily. For example, if I go out with Mona and I swap over to Kaeya, Liu Su gives Kaeya 1 energy, which is 50% to his elemental burst already. So that is very, very powerful and super threatening. The reason I go with Mona first is because in this particular team, I can tell that they are trying to do 2 things to me as well. They're trying to freeze my entire team through the use of Mona's Hydro application, and they're trying to use Ganyu's ability to quickly pierce damage through my opponent, through my team. And they're also trying to set up the burst as well because their burst only takes 2 energy to set up. So I need to, stop. I realized that in order to counter my opponent, I need to control and freeze them first rather than do big damage to them unless they swap into Ayaka, because Ayaka is the late game finisher for them in this particular team. So what I want to do is I just want to send out Mona first, do Hydro damage against this particular Mona, and then swap over to Kaeya as I will show in this particular gameplay. So just skipping forward a little bit, essentially turn 1, what I do is that I play my elemental skill first, right? My opponent does the same thing as well because they're trying to freeze us, but this is fine. I just basically play Liu Su, swap over to Kaeya, freeze their Mona, and force them to swap as well. And the reason why I wanted to force them to swap as well is because they're probably going to go into Ganyu right now, right? Which they do. And this is a good thing because I have no dice left. I'm not going to attack anymore. Even if I did have dice left, I was not going to use cryo damage from Kaeya. I wanted them to go into Ganyu because essentially at the end of turn 1, this little guy here will be dealing Hydro damage to Ganyu, which allows me to freeze Ganyu at the start of their turn, and therefore they cannot set up their burst. So they do attack me once, which is fine, right? At the end phase, I do Hydro damage, and at their end phase, they freeze my Kaeya, but I'm actually happy that they froze him at the end of my turn rather than at the start of my turn, because essentially I'm no longer frozen at this phase. So maybe one thing they should have done is that they should have just dealt normal damage against me so that they can freeze me right now. But essentially, because of my little guy there that dealt late game Hydro damage, I'm just going to use Kaeya to freeze Ganyu now, forcing them to either swap back to Mona or swap back to Ayaka, right? And this also shows that the turn 1 Liu Su play is super important because my first attack of round 2 is essentially playing Kaeya's Burst, which enables me to choose how I want to play my turn 2. I can either swap over to Mona to control whichever character they choose to go out with, or I can go over to Diluc and then start dealing a lot of damage to them. So in this particular game, I can see that they actually move over to Ayaka, and for Ayaka, you don't really want her on the field for too long a time, and I didn't really want to control her as well. I didn't want to freeze her. Instead, I really wanted to kill her off, and therefore I go over to Diluc, dealing 2 damage with the use of Kaeya's Burst, and then I deal 5 damage using Diluc's power damage, and then this leaves her at 3 HP. So I do notice that they have Favonius Church, and therefore the Ayaka would not die at the start of round 3. But if they did not have this, essentially at the start of round 3, Diluc would just attack for 3 more damage, and that's Ayaka gone, and that's the threat of the team gone, and that is really good. But I'm not threatened by the fact that, Ayaka is going to heal up to 5 again, because essentially turn 3 I can Diluc, I can deal 3 damage, and then I can swap over to another character, use this Cryo to, deal an additional 2 melt damage, and therefore take out this Ayaka anyway. So that is how I would play out first turn of most of my games with this particular team. And with that, we're going to be looking at the cards in the rest of this deck and look at how they support the game plan that we have, which is to either control your opponents through freeze or deal large damage through melt and vaporize. So in the equipment package, we have Searing Onslaught. I want to talk about the damage dealing equipment first. So we have the Flowing Flame that allows Diluc to cheat the cost of his Searing Onslaught. I do think that this is really good because it enables Diluc to attack 3 times in a row. So even if he didn't have any sort of energy, through the use of Flowing Flame, you'll be able to attack 3 times and therefore set up his burst immediately, which is super powerful. Next up, we have Wolf's Greystone. This is something that I featured in my previous video with Diluc as well. Essentially, this is very powerful because it can deal up to additional 3 damage if your opponent's target or your opponent's active character has equal or less than 6 HP. So this is super powerful, especially for a Diluc late game play, because essentially what you can do is that you'll be able to deal a total of 5 damage through the use of your normal attack, or you can even deal 6 damage through the use of your Searing Onslaught. So this is super powerful for Diluc. And I like to pair my Wolf's Greystone with Gambler's Earrings, because with Diluc easily dishing out 5 damage over and over, you want Gambler's Earrings on Diluc so that you can get some sort of recursion here, some sort of resource recursion, so that when you defeat your opponent's active character, you'll be able to create 2 more Omni Element dice, so that you can use Diluc to consistently kill off your opponent's characters over and over again. So these 3 cards are basically the aggressive damage dealing equipment that I have. I also have the more defensive package here. I like to play Lucky Dog's Silver Circlet in this particular deck because it says when your character uses an elemental skill, it will heal self for 2 HP. And this is pretty good for this particular deck because if you're looking at Mona, Kaeya, and Diluc, most of the time you want to use their elemental skill anyway, and therefore this is really good value for them because it guarantees that you can heal them for 2 damage almost every turn. The other more healing package that I have, or more healing equipment that I have as well, is something that I've already spoken about. It is Kaeya Specialization, Cold-Blooded Strike, because essentially when you use this, you'll be able to deal 3 cryo damage with Kaeya's skill, and also heal Kaeya for 2 HP. So if you have this available, and if you have Lucky Dog's Silver Circlet attached to Kaeya as well, essentially you'll be able to deal 3 cryo damage through the use of Kaeya, and heal Kaeya for 4 as well, which is super annoying because that is almost half of his HP. So that is basically the equipment package for big team recovery and big Diluc damage. Next up, we have the dice cheating package over here. Essentially, the dice cheating package is a combination of the different things that I've already spoken about. You have your your Flowing Flame, it is part of the dice cheating package. Gambler's Glove is part of the dice cheating package, but then you also have the more usual suspects such as Liban. Liban is pretty good for this particular team because sometimes you find yourself in awkward positions, right? Because sometimes you use Diluc's Burst that costs 4 elemental dice, you use Kaeya's burst that costs 4 elemental dice, and then you swap over to someone else and you decide to play your equipment, and you might have an odd number of dice left. So Liban is really good for picking out the pieces in this particular deck so that you can cheat a little bit by creating more Omni dice and drawing more cards. Another reason why I call this the dice cheating package is also because I played Knights of Favonius Library. I really like playing this particular card over Jade Chamber when I play 3 element teams, because when I play 3 element teams, the reason why I play it is because I probably want to swap over to other characters every so often. And therefore, I don't really like having Jade Chamber, because Jade Chamber only benefits my active character. So it does give my active character the dice that they want, but it doesn't give my other characters the dice that they need. So I want to play Favonius Library so that I can reroll as many times as possible and get the different permutations of dice that I need across my 3 different characters so that I can maximize the efficiency of my turns. And then the final dice cheating package is I Haven't Lost Yet, everyone's favorite card, because this is just good value in general, right? Because let's face it, in today's meta, there's probably not a situation whereby you can win a game or go through a game without losing one character. So through the use of this, you'll be able to, if you lost one of your characters during that turn, when you play this, you'll be able to create 1 Omni dice and create 1 energy as well for your new active character. So I really like this, and this is the last card in our dice cheating package. Next up, we also have what I call the damage control package. It's a little bit of healing, a little bit of swapping, but let's get into it. For healing, I do like playing Xingqiu in, and I do like playing the next card as well, which is Favonius Cathedral. So these are 2 location cards that I play through the cost of 2 dice. Essentially, I can heal my active character for 2 HP over 2 turns. And with Xingqiu in, I am basically healing my most injured standby characters for 2 HP as well. So the thing is, these 2 cards, not many people play them because right now we live in a world whereby we want to end games by round 3 or 4. But as mentioned earlier, for this particular team, I'm trying to control and chip down my opponent's HP such that I can finally do a huge Diluc knockout at the end of the game. And in order to protect my Diluc, I need Kaeya and Mona to take a little bit more damage, and therefore I like having these 2 sides set up because they can heal a lot of damage for your team. And one thing to note as well is that these 2 cards, or rather each of these cards, the abilities stack. So if you play 2 Favonius Cathedral, you'll be able to heal a total of 4 damage to your active character. So that's just one thing to note as well. In terms of my other healing thing, you also have Monster Hash Brown. It's just good value in general, only costs 1 dice and can heal your target character for 2 HP. And this other card, When the Crane Returns, I would actually call it as part of my damage reduction package rather than a quick swap package, because this enables me to quickly swap to my next character to the active character after I attack. So a really good example of this particular use case of this card is that I use Kaeya's Burst and I play When the Crane Returns, so that the moment I play Kaeya's Burst, I can immediately swap into Diluc so that I can, get Diluc to absorb some damage for Kaeya, so that I can keep my entire team's HP high, and then go into Diluc so that I can start to do melt damage. So I would actually call this part of my damage reduction package rather than a quick swap package. Finally, I have my, or not finally, second finally, I also have my energy package through the use of Liu Su. Liu Su is just good in general because he only costs 1, and when the moment you swap into another character, if they don't have any energy, they will gain 1 energy. So this is really good for the likes of Kaeya and Diluc, because it means that Kaeya is 1 energy closer to getting his burst, and it means that Diluc does take quite a bit of time in order to set out his burst, but it is very powerful, so you want to get there as soon as possible. And therefore, when you play Liu Su, essentially you bring Diluc 33% of the way there. I also play Kelx's Art, which is the ability to shift energy from at most 2 of your characters on standby to your active character. So this is really good if you have 1 energy each on Kaeya and Mona. You swap over Diluc, and then when you play this, essentially Diluc has 2 of 3 energy, and it probably means that he'll be able to do his burst at the start of the next turn. So Kelx's Art is pretty good for the 2 characters in general, or rather all 3 characters, because Mona does take a while to set up a burst as well. Her burst also costs 3 energy, so Kelx's Art is good in this team in general. And yeah, finally we come to the final package, which is the deck's other cards. We have Strategize to draw 2 cards. This is always good because with this particular team, you do need very, very specific cards. So I use Strategize for 2 reasons. Firstly, to lean out the deck so that I can draw all the different cards that I want and have a higher chance of drawing what I need during the end phase. The other reason why I like Strategize as well is because it's actually an enabler for you to fix your dice. Because when you spend 1 dice, essentially you get 2 cards and you can use those 2 cards to fix the dice, at least fix 2 elemental dice, right? And that can be huge because it can enable elemental skills for any of your different characters easily or more easily. And yeah, I believe that is every single card that I have in this deck. So just to summarize the team's strategy or the deck strategy, essentially you want to go out with Mona first, set up for either freeze control or vaporize damage, and then use the likes of Kaeya's Burst to start to chip down your opponent's damage and set up melt damage for Diluc as well. And finally, use Diluc's Burst for big damage through the use of his Burst, through the use of Searing Onslaught, through the use of Rose Gravestone. And if you ever need any sort of form of survivability, play things like Xingqiu, play things like Ferventous Cathedral, play things like your Lucky Dog Circlet, and swap over to Kaeya so they can take damage for you, and then right after he takes damage, you heal him back up using Cold Blooded Strike. So yeah, this is a very fun team. I hope you like it, and yeah, let's go into the gameplay. And if you like everything that you've seen so far, do remember to like and subscribe. And yep, let's go over to the first match with Ayaka Freeze. Alright, so going into the first game of this particular match, we are up against Ayaka Freeze. We've already looked at the beginning of this particular game, but I would just like to do like a play-by-play playback of why I did what I did. And yeah, let's get into it. So starting hand, as mentioned earlier, I want to start my game with a Yuzu in hand, so happy to see it in this particular hand. What you might notice here is that we also have an Iron Tongue Tian in this particular hand, but I decided to swap him out after this match because he just didn't really do much for me, and he just kind of ramps energy up a bit too slowly for my liking in his particular team. So I actually swapped him out for even more recovery, such as the Ferventous Cathedral and the Xingqiu. I believe I'm only playing the Cathedral in this deck, in this first iteration of the deck, but yeah, I swapped him out for Xingqiu. So as mentioned in the other gameplay video, or rather the turn 1 guide, I basically am trying to deal hydro damage against my opponent's Mona so that I can set my freeze strategy up through the use of Mona plus Kaeya. So now I use my skill, and at the end of this round, I should be able to apply hydro damage to at least 2 of my opponent's characters, which is really important to me because I would want to, you know, increase the chances of being able to freeze or vaporize them. So Demona does a like-for-like play, and the thing is I can either just leave Demona in, or I can go into Kaeya and start to freeze her. I decide to freeze her for 2 particular reasons. The first reason is because I have the Cryo Dice to do it anyway. The second reason is because if I don't deal damage to her, they're probably going to swap out to Ganyu anyway, because looking at this team, as mentioned in the turn 1 guide, I recognize that this Ayaka Freeze team is trying to set up Ganyu as soon as possible so that they can use their burst. So I opted to deal damage to Mona because they were always going to swap out to Ganyu, so the more damage I can deal to Mona earlier, the better. So they decide to use the Trial of the Tilin. If I were this Ganyu player, I will actually probably play the... I will actually probably end my turn instead. Might be quite controversial. I'll end my turn here so that my Mona skill thing can freeze my Kaeya, or rather can apply Hydro to my Kaeya, and then at the start of their turn, they'll be able to use Ganyu to freeze my Kaeya, and therefore prevent me from freezing them instead. So one thing I've learned through playing this game is that actually, ending your turn with lots of dice in hand is not always a bad thing. It might actually work in your favor if you're trying to win tempo through the use of ending your turn early. Another example is that if you looked at my latest gameplay video whereby I was playing quicken Sino, I actually won the game because I ended my round by with 5 different dice in hand, right? So yeah, do take note, it is not always a bad thing to end your rounds early. So anyway, I managed to freeze the Ganyu and I managed to, set up Kaeya's burst. And my opponent is probably going to swap over to another character, or rather they must swap over to another character because there's nothing they can do here. And for those that have watched the turn 1 strategy chapter from end to end, you would know that they are actually going to swap over to Ayaka here. So they do set up a lot of location before doing their swap. I have a feeling they probably swapped because they have a bad hand with their dice and they needed to re-roll them. They want to play some support sites for greater team survivability to start to heal damage, and they wanted to play the library in order to re-roll their hand. So that's my guess. But anyway, they go over to Ayaka and they start dealing damage against Diluc. Diluc does do 5 melt damage here. I am probably going to sacrifice those 2 in my hand. And the reason why I kept the food in my hand is because the food is a very quick recovery, and it is very dice efficient as well. It just costs 1 to heal 2 HP, right? And that is good against a deck like this because with Ayaka Freeze, damage can come out of nowhere and they like to freeze and control my characters as well. So if I can get quick heals during my turn rather than having slow heals at the end of my turn through the use of Cathedral, it might actually enable me to annoy them a bit further by forcing them to waste their dice to kill my characters. And therefore I was thinking that might help me to deal more damage to them and keep the tempo up. So here you can see that I was actually trying to roll for non-pyro dice because I fully recognize that there is not much point for me to leave Diluc in.
It is as the stars foretold.
My Diluc would not be able to kill the Mona, and I would rather freeze and control the Mona or continue to deal extra Hydro application throughout their team. So that was the thinking behind that. I really didn't want to waste my Diluc's health and my Diluc's dice just to kill a Mona, which is not the main threat in this particular team, in my opinion. Of course, she is a threat because she's able to do Hydro application, and she's the only one that can do Hydro application in this entire team. But I was fine with swapping over to Mona so that I can start to do Hydro damage to my opponent and set up for future turns. So unfortunately, they do hit my Mona quite badly through the use of their specialization, but I do think that is fine because I can still swap over to Diluc to deal cryo damage on the Ganyu. And yeah, probably deal melt damage as well. So all is good, all is good. So here you can see me wasting some time, not really doing anything because I thought that it was my opponent's turn. But I completely forgot that Mona was able to do a quick swap over Diluc. And it is going to take some time for me to realize that. And yep, now I've realized it and I think, oh wait, I need to sacrifice some dice in order to do damage to Ganyu. So I have 2 options here, right? I can either do big melt damage now to Ganyu, or I can, just sit back and use a normal attack and then, not really threaten that kill yet. But I decide to just use attack Ganyu melt anyway because I really wanted to start to threaten the Ganyu, and with 3 dice left I was able to kill off the Ganyu through the use of my Diluc. And luckily, I mean, or rather, Luckily, I am able to kill off the Ganyu if I were to sacrifice one of my items here. But unfortunately, if I do that, it also means that they will be able to end their turn and go into Mona to freeze my Diluc at the start of my next turn. So this is a little bit dicey for me here. So instead of killing off the Ganyu, I decided not to kill the Ganyu and probably just equip the Gambler's Earrings so that I can kill the Ganyu immediately at the start of my next turn, gain the extra 2 dice, and hope that their Mona does not kill us, as I am now up to 6 HP, or rather 5 HP after the attack from the Tilan. So it is looking a little bit dangerous for me now because I am sitting at 335 HP and they still look pretty tanky at the moment, but yeah, I think it's still gonna be alright. So the annoying thing is I am currently not in position to kill off the Ganyu properly, but it is still okay because essentially I can equip my Wolf's Greystone to get an additional hit onto Ganyu and finish her off. And the downside of this is that it still exposes my Diluc to Mona's freeze, but that is okay for me because I probably just want to swap over to someone else, allow them to take the damage before I start my next turn with a knockout either on Mona using Diluc's burst or a knockout on Ayaka using Diluc's normal attack. So I think I do swap out to Kaeya here, because regardless of who I swap out to, since Mona and Kaeya are both at 3 HP, regardless of who I swap out to, they're gonna die anyway, because the Ayaka can do some damage to me, and the Tilans can also do a total of 1 plus 2 damage to my characters. So I swap over to Mona and they probably die. But before she dies, I wanted to do some damage first because why not? And I do use I haven't lost yet. Mainly because I had a brainwave at this particular moment. I realized that if I use Mona's E, I get a shield for her, and then it means that she does not die right now at the end phase. And surviving this hit is actually important to me because it means that since my opponent is starting first, they kill my Mona, and then I swap over to Diluc to kill the Ayaka. And the thing is, their Mona does not actually have their burst set up, and that means that they can only deal 1 damage to me, and therefore they are not able to kill off my Diluc. Yep, so my opponent starts here first, and they just do their thing and kill off this Mona.
My reckoning has come.
And then I swap over to Diluc, trying to make sure that I definitely would not die to Mona, unless they might have a star sign or something to kill off Diluc. If they did, that would be super unfortunate, but luckily they didn't, and I think what they did instead is to play their elemental skill to deal 1 damage to Diluc, and also to set up 1 shield for Diluc. But luckily, I have 2 things, or rather 3 things set up for Diluc to take the final turn kill, which is Diluc's Burst, the Cryo application on Mona, which means Mona will take at least 10 damage or 9 damage with the shield on, but because Mona is on 6 health, Wolf's Greystone activates and I actually do 12 damage in total to Mona and therefore take win. This was a very close match, so well done my opponent GG's. I think we both played pretty well, but it also shows that, hey, well, this, I wouldn't call this deck a jank deck, I wouldn't call it a meme deck, but it is a good deck and yeah, it does stand a chance against the top decks. And next up we have a match against Razor, Sucrose, and Xingqiu. And when I saw this, I actually thought that my opponent was a bot because lots of people have this theory that, oh, if your opponent has a standard English name and if they play a really random team that doesn't really make sense, and if they play lots of equipment and lots of weapons and lots of artifacts, they're probably a bot. And that was what I thought, and I actually feared it because I try to not, or rather I don't like to show bot battles here because I'll rather, you know, prove that the different decks that I'm walking you through are viable. But there are certain indications in here to show that my opponent is not a bot. This is just a very spicy deck that they have came up with, and I can prove to you at the end that this is not a bot. So I did think that this was a bot because the first thing they did was to play that equipment immediately on Sucrose, but it seems like they knew something that I didn't. They basically had big brain here. So they use Razor to apply Electro on me, and I have my Mona out in play, right? So I could either use Mona to start to apply Hydro to their Sucrose, or I can quick swap into Kaeya. So the miscalculation that I had here was that I forgot that they actually used an artifact here. And with that artifact, they actually could use Anemo damage, or rather they can apply Anemo damage to deal, or rather to spread the Electro across my entire team. So my miscalculation here is that I saw that they have 2 dice left, and I just assumed that there's no way they can attack. This is a bot, they're not that smart. And therefore there's no way they are able to spread Electro throughout my entire team. But that is a gross miscalculation because as you will see later, they have an artifact applied to them or equipped to them, and therefore they can still deal Anemo damage and spread to deal full damage across my team and spread the Electro application throughout my team. So because of my miscalculation, I decide to deal some Hydro damage to Sucrose. I do not play the skill because I don't have enough fixed dice or enough Hydro dice to play it, neither do I have enough cards to fix it, or rather I have enough cards to fix it, but it was just not worth it, right? Because this was still turn 1. And as much as I thought this was a bot, I just wanted to respect the bot as well, rather than to throw all of my cards to just fix my dice into Hydro dice. So the moment they played the Anemo attack, I realized, hang on, this is fishy. They're smart. Are they not bots after all? So I go over to I play strategize, trying to get more cards, and then what I do next is I basically just equip the Lucky Dog Circlet to Kaeya so that Kaeya can start to heal some damage in the next turn, and I set up for the next turn through the use of Liusu. And the reason why I wanted to end my turn right now is because I did not want them to end their turn and attack first, because if they were to attack first, Sucrose is actually pretty annoying. Sucrose will be able to spread Electro throughout my team again, so I wanted to attack first so that I can swap over from Mona to Kaeya as a fast action, and therefore freeze their Sucrose and stop them from doing anything else. So I did get a pretty good roll here. I managed to get lots of paradise, which is what you love to see.
This will be
Swap over to Kaeya, get 1 energy for Kaeya, and then freeze that Sucrose while also gaining 2 HP. Very tasty. So another indication that this might have been a bot was because this opponent also played lots of 2-cost equipment. When I saw that, I was thinking, oh no, this might just be a really smart bot. Maybe Hoyoverse updated the bot algorithm and actually made them really smart. But yeah, watch till the end. This is not a bot because they do certain things that bots probably wouldn't do unless Hoyoverse tried to make the bots very realistic. But in any case, I basically sacked all of my cards, or most of my cards, just to play Kaeya first. The reason why I did that was because I just wanted to get the burst out of the way so that I can swap over to Mona to start to freeze my opponent, or swap over to Diluc to start to melt my opponent. So at this point, I didn't think that Sucrose was the threat. Again, with the 2-cost weapon, I didn't think Sucrose was the threat. I thought Xingqiu was actually the threat because I hate having to deal with Rain Cutter. But the interesting thing is they actually swapped over to Razor, which didn't really make sense to me at that point of time, because if I were to swap over to Mona or Diluc, essentially I will be able to deal cryo damage through their Razor. So that was another move that made me think that this was a bot, but my opponent just has a bigger brain than I do. I just couldn't fathom what they were trying to do. So yeah, props to my opponent, yeah, they just got a massive brain. So I was trying to reroll for the Cryo dice and the Hydro dice because I just thought that, yeah, I want to buy some time. I want to start to heal my Kaeya, especially since, you know, I've got the Lucky Dog Circlet already attached to Kaeya. So I can use Kaeya, I can swap over to someone else, and I can freeze off the Razor. But my opponent decides to swap over to Sucrose, which is perfect for me because it means that I can swap over to another character while also dealing Cryo application. So this is really good for me because I essentially set up the Cryo application for the entire team. And with that, the Sucrose is taken care of, and I was quite happy with that because Sucrose in itself, I don't think she is too much of a threat, but her burst can be super annoying, and her burst was set up by then. So I was just happy to see that, yep, I was able to take care of her.
My sword.
So they do deal the Rain Cutter, and what I decided to do was to steal all of my character's energy, pass it over to Diluc so that I can go for a turn 1 burst, because I thought that my opponent couldn't kill me at the start of that turn 1 anyway. They can get Rain Cutter off, which is super annoying, but yeah, I just wanted to survive. And if you recall in the team synergy section, this is a survival deck. I am not trying to kill my opponent by round 3 or 4. I mean, round 3 was already over. This is round 4. I'm nowhere close to killing off my opponent. But yeah, I was just trying to survive at this point in time. And trying to reroll for the good paradise so that I can go in with a burst. And I do get 3, which is pretty good. I think I probably sacrifice something here. Yep, got rid of the Wangshu in so that I can deal 7 burst damage to Xingqiu, which is pretty good because what it means is that the moment I swap to another character, Xingqiu dies because of Chaos Burst. So that was a bit fishy to me, right? Because I was thinking, why would a fully set up Xingqiu not use their burst? But I think they probably just have a terrible dice roll, which is unfortunate for them because they just couldn't get the Rain Cutter off.
My reckoning has come.
This will be interesting.
So in this scenario, I was just trying to chip off damage through the use of Kaeya because I really wanted him to survive as much as possible, get some healing back up, and then chip off the damage onto Razor so that I can go for a melt damage endgame play. And this is a blunder by me. It's not that I haven't lost yet because I thought that I was gonna get 2 dice so that I can play the Wangshu in and start to heal up my Diluc. But unfortunately, I am very silly and I was wrong, and yeah, I don't get 2 dice, I get 1 die, and I cannot play Wangshu in because I'm a silly man. Right, so I keep re-rolling for the card roll because I misplayed the I haven't lost yet, but that
so
gave me 1 energy, and this gives me the ability to play Chaos Burst. And I wanted to play Chaos Burst sooner rather than later because I have a feeling that my opponent is probably going to do something pretty sneaky, which they did because they have their burst set up, and Kaeya is in the death zone. So I wanted to just chip off damage through the use of the burst, through the use of swapping over the Diluc, and through the use of normal attack to with Kaeya. So my opponent probably kills off Kaeya here through the use of the normal attack, dealing 2 damage, and then his little wolf guy deals 2 more damage, killing off Kaeya. And this is the moment where I realize my opponent is not a bot because they concede, because they realize that I have lethal in hand through the use of Chaos Burst. So thank you for the game to my opponent. I'm very glad that you are not a bot, but you do have a very spicy deck. I do like it. And yeah, GG's. And if you like the different decks I've been playing today, if you like the guide, do like and subscribe, and I will see you later in the next one. Cheers.